Hello, everybody. NEC Hoops has been happening for more than a month now. We're approaching the holiday season, so what better time to catch up on NEC women's basketball than right here, right now, with Craig D'Amico, play-by-play for NEC on ESPN3. He's also a contributor to the NEC Overtime blog. Craig, let's get right to the point. Your non-conference observations thus far in NEC women's basketball.
Well, first of all, Ralph, it's always a gift coming in and talking women's basketball with you. But yeah, the women's basketball season has been underway for about a month now, and we've gotten some interesting returns back. I mean, to be honest, it's not the strongest non-conference year for the NEC women's basketball, but there is some good things there. 20 wins against Division I opponents in non-conference play. The conference has had wins against 11 different leagues. Robert Morris has a win over the A-10. Sacred Heart has a win over the MAC, maybe my favorite. 4 wins against the America East. So there is some great things going on there on a national level with the NEC making its mark. But within the Northeast Conference, all these teams jockeying, trying to put their best foot forward to get ready for when the NEC New Year starts right in early January. You have St. Francis, Brooklyn, Mount St. Mary's, two of the youngest head coaches with some fast-paced tempo that they like to push, trying to work that out. So they're rolling on all cylinders. You have veteran teams like Bryant, Sacred Heart, Robert Morris, who are playing challenging non-conference schedules, trying to stay healthy so that they could be ready to be towards the top of the league again. You have a team like St. Francis, has a lot to figure out as the reigning champions. They had a lot to figure out prior to this season without an Ace Harrison and a Caitlin Kroll. And then you have a team like LIU that lost so much, so they're trying to figure out who are going to be the proper players to be in the proper spot. So a lot of jockeying here the last month and this next month to get ready for early January.
Well, let me stop you right there, Craig, because you mentioned two teams, Mount St. Mary's and St. Francis Brooklyn, two teams that we didn't necessarily know what to expect from them heading into the season. Maria Marquezano down at the Mount in her second season as a head coach. And then, of course, in St. Francis Brooklyn, Linda Simino, the former America East Coach of the Year, came downstate into Brooklyn. She takes over in Brooklyn Heights, and two fairly new coaches here in the NEC, but they are getting some great returns early on this season, picked toward the middle of the pack in the preseason coaches poll, but really have been doing much better than that. I know St. Francis Brooklyn has been scoring in the triple digits. Mount St. Mary's on a 4-game win streak. They have a big opportunity coming up against Virginia Tech. But let's elaborate on a little of those on those two teams, Craig. What have you seen exactly from the Mountaineers and the Terriers this non-conference season?
Yeah, boy, they've been fun to watch. They have the two best records in non-conference play so far. Let's start with Mount St. Mary's. They have the best RPI in the league, and women's basketball still uses the RPI as a rankings tool. They're at 145, ahead of Sacred Heart, ahead of St. Francis Brooklyn, and it's this lineup that they found with Lawless, Sullivan, Harrison, Settle, and Lee, averaging 74.5 points per game together, and they're on a 4-game win streak going into that Virginia Tech game this weekend that you mentioned. If we go analytics on you, their EFG percentage, their efficient field goal percentage, is at 51.2, which is 40th in the nation, and they average 0.8 points per play. To compare, SFU last year was at 1 points per play, and even 1, so they're not too far off there. So they're scoring efficiently. The one Achilles heel that maybe they need to work on as we get towards conference play is rebounding. They have Lee there to get the rebound. She's the leading rebounder, but they need to pick it up a little bit more in the rebounding department.
Before we go on to St. Francis Brooklyn, keep it with Mount for a second here. Now, I'm no sabermetrician, to say the least, but you mentioned something about a high shooting percentage, and to me, what makes that more impressive is that Mount shoots a lot of three-pointers. There are a lot of long-distance shots going up, and obviously you think high-volume three-point shooting, you may not have one of the highest field goal percentages in the conference, but it seems that they do. Now, I know that you mentioned efficiency field goal percentage, so how does that differ at all from your traditional field goal percentage?
Percentage of shots that you hit and factoring in the percentage of shots that you make. So again, over 50% is really good, and they're at 51.2. So the fact that not only are they making most of their shots, but they're making a high percentage of the good shots that they take, it's pretty strong.
All right, well, what have you seen so far from the Terriers? Linda Simino.
Yeah, they are moving fast. Coach Simino said on NEC Media Day when she spoke with Pam and Dave that she wanted to push the tempo a little bit more than previous years, that she wanted to shoot a lot of threes, that she wanted to move things fast. And boy, was she not lying. They've done that to this point of the season.
And Craig, I think you have to give credit to the athletes in this case too, because the Jay Johnsons, the Amy O'Neills, they were brought in under Coach Thurston's system, had a lot of success under Coach T, but Coach T's more the half-court set, a lot of screens, a lot of passing. It's a different style than Simino likes to play, but yet these players who thrived under Thurston are thriving now in a new system under Simino. So to me, that says a lot about the versatility of the athletes and also their willingness to learn, their willingness to work hard at a new system.
And again, it's players that have been there for a while now. It's a core group that's been together now, 2, 3, going into perhaps for some 4 years. So they had to make an adjustment. But again, you're getting a lot of shots, scoring a lot of points. That's fun stuff. We've seen that in Loretto the last couple of years with the other St. Francis. So it's a transition, but they've done it quite well. 19th in the nation in scoring, 82.8 points per game. They lead the nation as we speak right now in three-point field goal percentage. Their EFG percentage is over 50%, 53.1, 22nd in the nation. Last year, the other St. Francis was at 46.7. So to compare, they're 5.56 points higher. Points per play, as we talked about with Mount, they're 34th in the nation at .89. And the one thing for them to shore up is the turnover rate. They're turning the ball over about 20 times per game, 22% of their possessions. Not good. And that's something that you figure as the season goes along and they form that chemistry, that the turnovers, might fix themselves a little bit. But right now, that's been the only Achilles heel. That's been the only thing stopping St. Francis. As you mentioned, they scored over 100 points 3 times in their first couple games. They hadn't had a 100-point game in their entire program history until then. So a great start for St. Francis Brooklyn.
All right, so you gave us the macro view. We talked about 2 teams who really popped off the page here in the first month of the season. Now, let's switch gears to some individual performers. 3 vets who have impressed thus far. 3 veteran players in the Northeast Conference who are doing really what you expected them to do.
Well, my 3 stars of the season so far, right from my NEC Overtime Fast Break column every Wednesday on the NEC Overtime blog, little plug right there.
NECOvertime.com, an alternate take on everything NEC sports.
And that's it. So you can check it out. My top 3 players from the first month of the season. We start with Juliet Lawless from Mount St. Mary's. We talked about the Mount earlier on. She's really been the focal point. During this 4-game win streak, she's averaging 19.5 points per game. She's their leading scorer, top 5 in the league. She was the most improved player in the league a year ago. She's improved already from the most improved season, so that's been incredible. Sydney Holloway from the Bryant Bulldogs, she averages a double-double, one of 2 players in the league to average a double-double at the moment. She had a 20-20 game the first week of the season with 20 points, 20 rebounds. She's top 4 in points, top 4 in rebounds, and she's coming up on 1,000 points for her career, and she's only a junior. So she's really been incredible for the Bulldogs. And my player of the year, if we had to stop the season and vote today, my player of the year is Jay Johnson from St. Francis Brooklyn. She's one of 19 players in the entire country to be shooting 50% or more from 3-point range. She's the leading scorer in the Northeast Conference. She had a game the other day, triple overtime, where she played all 55 minutes with Amy O'Neill on the floor. A big comeback win for the Terriers. She had a 27-point game earlier in the season, I believe, against Morehead State. So she's been absolutely incredible, helping lead that #1 offense.
And you mentioned player of the year. Of course, I don't get a vote. You don't get a vote. That's determined by the head coaches at year's end. But really, realistically, any of those 3 that you mentioned, you can make an honest case for NEC Player of the Year thus far this season?
Well, I tell you what, I had those three as my top three, going into last weekend.
You're splitting hairs.
Right,
here,
as I was putting together my article, the rankings switched 3 times over the weekend. So you're right. I mean, right now we're splitting hairs.
And really, we'll find out when the money is made in conference play. Those 18 conference games go a long way in not only determining the winner, but determining the postseason awards.
What, like a quarter of the way through the season, so there's still a long way to go.
I mean, to think of all this excitement that still awaits, Craig. 3 vets. Now let's go over to the youngsters. 3 rookies who've caught your eye in the non-conference play.
Well, Michaela Harrison from Mount St. Mary's, she might be the rookie of the year if the season stopped right now. She's a 2-time rookie of the week. She was a player of the week, I believe, earlier in the season. She's been a big part of this 4-game win streak where she's been in the starting lineup for the Mount.
Yeah, she's fitting nicely. You mentioned also they have Rebecca Lee and then Daly Sullivan, a sophomore sharpshooter, and then, of course, Lawless, the senior leader of it all. So we got Michaela Harrison. What about 2 more?
Averaging a double. She's the other player averaging a double-double, as well as Sydney Holloway. And I think Ebony Horton from St. Francis, Brooklyn, she's a newcomer inserted into that veteran group that we talked about, and she's performed quite well. She had some clutch free throws the other day in the win over St. Peter. She's 3rd on the Terriers in scoring. So, she's come along very quickly in a short period of time with that Terrier group.
Yeah, really no surprise there, Craig, that you mentioned players from St. Francis, Brooklyn, and Mount St. Mary's. And really, those are the 2 teams that are hot heading into the holiday season and getting some great non-conference results. So, and obviously, when I asked you for the 3 veterans, top performers, you said, of course, Jay Johnson from SFBK and Juliet Lawless from Mount. So, both teams have veterans and newcomers contributing to that success thus far. Now, as we move on, we'll keep it on the individual side of things here, but we'll look at our milestone watch. Few Northeast Conference athletes approaching milestones. Obviously, the big one is reigning NEC Player of the Year, Jessica Kovach, the active leading scorer in Division I right now. What do you have as far as Jess Kovach goes? What are we looking at here? Possible NEC scoring record. She's already got the career 3-point record. What's next for Kovach?
Man, Rob, we've been for the last 18 years calling Jess Noble the all-time leading scorer in NEC basketball. By the time this weekend is over, that very well may change. Jess Kovach, 2,301 points, 37 away from tying, 38 from surpassing Zanoble's career mark. The Red Flesh have 2 games in Seattle at the Husky Classic this weekend, playing Boise State on Saturday and then either Washington or Montana on Sunday. Unless she goes off in that first game, that game on Sunday could very well be the game that we see a new scoring leader in the history of NEC women's basketball. If not, if she doesn't get it this weekend, they return home on Wednesday the 19th against Morehead State. So one of those 3 games, you think that would be the one, if all goes well and obviously health and all that, we could see a new scoring record broken.
And she's averaging 21.9 points per game for her 4-year career. So Kovach on the cusp of making more history. This is a big one, folks, because Jessa Noble is SFU's all-time leading scorer and the all-time NEC leading scorer and NEC Hall of Famer and a WNBA draft pick by the Sacramento Monarchs back in 2000-2001. Kovach, now that's about scoring. What about Kiki Palmer and that passing up at Bryant?
Well, you talk with Coach Burke, as we have for the last couple of years, and she'll tell you Kiki Palmer is the engine that makes that ship go with distributing the basketball. She is in line to be one of 7 players in the history of the conference to reach 500 assists as she's coming up there. And, the Bryant Bulldogs, we mentioned, they're going through a tough non-conference schedule right now, trying to get the kinks worked out before they go into conference play. If they're going to, right the ship and be towards the top of the conference, where we expect them to be, Kiki Palmer is going to be the engine that helps them go. So you have her, and then also, we want to give a shout out to Kiana Patterson, 1,000 points for Central Connecticut. Had that against Rutgers back in early November. And as we mentioned, Sydney Holloway from the Bulldogs is approaching 1,000 points as well.
All right, so you touched on the milestone watch there. Before we wrap it up on this special holiday season edition of NEC Women's Basketball on the Run, 3 conference games, or it doesn't have to be 3, why limit you? But just your can't-miss conference games for the month of January.
Well, I'm going to throw one non-conference game first. Sacred Heart goes to Kentucky right before the start of conference play, so a chance for the NEC to get a big win against an SEC school. So we'll keep our eye on that coming up.
And Sacred Heart has had a win over an SEC member before. Back when Ed Swanson was the coach, they were down at the Paradise Jam, and they took down Auburn. So wouldn't be the first time.
Absolutely. So keep your eye on that. But once we get into the NEC New Year and conference play starts, I'm going to throw out there our first TV game on ESPN3. The St. Francis Brooklyn Terriers, we talked about how exciting they've been, taking on the Bryant Bulldogs, a team that is in contention for a championship this year. That's a monster game right at the very start, opening weekend of the season. Then after that, you have the Battle of Brooklyn, LIU and St. Francis, a rematch of the postseason a year ago when LIU Brooklyn knocked out the Terriers, who were number 3 in the conference. And then you get towards the end of the month of January, we have that very first St. Francis Brooklyn Mount St. Mary's head-to-head game that, I wish they could play now, but we have to wait another month. And then also throw in there Bryant playing Sacred Heart playing St. Francis and Robert Morris in the same weekend in January. So, things are going to be moving quickly as teams again try to make that run towards the 2019 championship.
And, of course, as Craig alluded to, there will be featured matchups on ESPN3. Craig will be in the play-by-play chair for those. And then, of course, every other game you can watch live for free at necfrontrow.com. With that said, Craig, it's been a pleasure checking in with you.
Absolutely. Happy holidays, my friend.
Thanks a lot. And happy NEC hoop season, because it's only going to get hotter from here on out. So for Craig D'Amico, I'm Ralph Ventre. Thank you for watching this special edition of NEC Women's Basketball on the Run. We'll see you again in the new year.